Hello. Hi, welcome all. Welcome everyone. I'm sorry I was a minute or two late and we still have a couple folks joining, so I'm just gonna give it one more minute and then we can get started. Okay, let's see. We got 6 people, decent amount of folks on the call. All right, let's get started. So, thanks everyone for joining. You may have met me in the first training if it was me who did it. My name is Rachel Leidy. I'm the director of compliance education here at FutureFeed, and I'm going to be doing today's training. So I'm already sharing my screen. Let me know if you're not seeing my screen. This is training session number 2 for end users. And so today I'm going to be covering the assess area of FutureFeed. Then we're going to be talking about and reviewing the system security plan of FutureFeed, and then on to your system POAM, and then we'll talk about deliverables and just cover a few other things and wrap up the training. So in the first session, I would have addressed or trained on covered the dashboard area. I also would have gone over the start area. Remember, in start, this is where you're defining your high-level company information as well as high-level system information like the system name, scope, boundary description. Then you're also defining your uh, system scope a little bit, identifying physical locations and the cage codes in scope. Data inventory is also captured in the start area as well as a few FutureFeed platform settings. After you start populating this area, this start area of FutureFeed, then we recommend moving on to the people area FutureFeed, where you start defining the users who need access to FutureFeed, but also the users, roles, and teams who are going to be involved with implementing these requirements or managing compliance. Then after tools, we recommend, or I'm sorry, after people, we recommend you go on to tools and start defining the technology that is operated, managed by, used by your company for storing, processing, or transmitting or securing CUI FCI data. Okay, so start logging all those technologies and then categorizing them if they are in scope of the requirements, meaning when I talk about categorization, I'll just open up a tool here. So in the compliance, here's where you categorize your assets. So if it's one of the first, one of the top 4 categories here, then those assets will be in scope of the requirements and they will be evaluated and assessed for NIST 800-171 CMMC requirements. Anything that you say out of scope is logically or physically separated from what is in scope. So after you log tools and then define what's in scope versus out scope, and start connecting those assets to the requirement and identifying personnel responsible, then go on to start defining the security documentation that the company is utilizing or producing to support the cyber requirements. Identify the people responsible for implementing and managing that documentation, and then connect the documents to the requirements, essentially connecting the proof to the associated requirements. Um, And then that brings us to today, where we're at. We're going to start talking about the assess. So at this point in time, if you had approached populating future feed like we discussed in the first training, and you had added your tools and your documents and started connecting them to the requirements, then when you're in this assess area, you're going to have some of this information already identified and filled out. Now, if you've not done any or up provided any assessment results in FutureFeed, logged any assessment results in FutureFeed yet, and you're just getting started, then everything here that you're going to see is going to be blue, not assessed. But if you click into the control down under the examine area and down under the test area, for some of your requirements, you should see some tools and documents under these two areas, okay? Because as you were associating your security documents to the requirements with the connect feature, so I'm going to go into a document, open a document entry, go into the connect area. So if I would have made a connection between my audit and accountability policy and a requirement, let's go ahead and do that right now. We'll just tag it to one. So had you done this as you were adding your documents and adding your tools, then the documents show up. Let's go into that 311. The documents are going to show up under this examine area. Okay. So here I should see down below in my policies, there's my audit and accountability policy. And then same thing for tools. Had you connected the tools to the requirements, you're going to see those under this test area. This is where all your technology IT products gets listed out, the ones that are associated with this requirement. Okay. So if you didn't have time to do that, or you approached FutureFeed a different way, no worries. I'm just trying to show you that recommended approach of filling out tools, documents, and then going on to assess. We recommend that approach because now you're in this assess area and you could start reading the requirements and doing an internal evaluation of your own, uh, determining if that's implemented or not. So, for example, this one here, it's blank. Let's pretend I've never assessed this control before. So now I'm wearing my assessor hat, my internal assessor hat, and I'm going to read the requirement, create and retain system audit logs to the extent needed to support after the fact investigations of suspicious activity, essentially. Okay. And then I'll go down, and this is going to be blank at first, but I'm going to read these objectives and I'm going to start working my way through these objectives just to get an understanding. So here, we're looking to define some stuff and then we got to implement some stuff. If I scroll down now, then I'll see that audit and accountability policy. And so now I can open up that audit and accountability policy. I could open it up and start evaluating if some of these objectives where we're looking for a definition, if that definition is present, right? So objective F, well, that was a bad, that was a bad one. Let's see, objective E, retention requirements are defined, all right? So if I'm evaluating this, then I'm going to scroll down. Okay, I see my audit and accountability policy. My company has one. Maybe it's in there. If it's not in there, should it be in there? Or do I need to make another policy? So then I look at my policy and let's say I see that definition. Okay, it looks good. That definition, we do define that objective. So now I'll close back out of there and I'm going to go up to objective E and I'm going to mark it met. Yours is going to be in this unknown state here. So you would mark yours met. Okay. But don't stop there. It's important for you to capture details on why you said it's met. So next, you're going to want to open up this objective statement here and define, you know, basically just summarize why you said it's met. So honestly, when it comes to these objective statements, I typically just end up regurgitating the requirement in most cases. So retention requirements for all audit records are defined in the company audit and accountability policy. Okay. And that would be my implementation narrative for that one objective. Me personally, I wouldn't have to go much further. Um, Now let's pretend you had a cloud service provider. And in that cloud environment, they are doing audit, their responsibility for configuring audit logs and system auditing, and they're responsible for managing and reviewing and monitoring and analyzing those audit logs, right? So in this example, let's say that you have an external service provider, so another component of your environment. It's capturing audit logs like it's required to do, but you don't have any responsibility with configuring anything related to that audit capability. That's what we're gonna recall inheritance. So in that case, my statement would be like, additionally, and let me turn off that. Additionally, um, for the, let's call it the GCC high CSP environment slash component. Let's call it a component of my system or my environment, right? Because the system is, when I say the system, I'm referring to that your whole entire compliance boundary. It's a system of systems, right? So I'm saying that additionally, for the cloud service provider component of my compliance environment, maybe that's how I should have said it, in my compliance environment, um, uh, audit and accountability requirements are implemented by um, hmm, CSP company provider and uh, see the CSP CRM for additional details. Okay, that's how I'd write for inheritance. I'm still keeping it short and sweet, just speaking to the objective. But now in this hybrid environment example that I'm using, my first statement of retention requirements are defined here. It may not be applicable because, for example, I may have another component in my environment where that implementation is different, or that, yeah, the implementation is different. So in that case, you're paying someone to manage that environment, and let's just say you defined a different frequency of or a different retention period for audit logs there. For whatever reason, you didn't align the two. Okay, all I'm saying is make sure that you address the implementation, but also address the implementation everywhere in your environment. Don't forget that for some of these requirements and for some of your systems, the implementation or the enforcement of these requirements may be different. It may be a different configuration setting. It may be a different, completely different domain or OU that's managing that policy, and it has different policies set and defined. Or you may have an external service provider involved and they're doing something for a component or a portion of your environment. Okay. So um I digress, but where were we? So as you're conducting your own internal assessment, review the objectives. Then, with what you have available to you, all that work you did by logging tools and documents, try to start painting that picture for yourself. Do we have a document that speaks about auditing and maybe defines this? Do we have a auditing system? What's our SEAM? Who's reviewing and setting and configuring these audit log settings? Okay, so start questioning that. Um, and what you're going to be doing is performing your own assessment. So the next three sections here are meant to help you with doing that assessment, your own assessment. So this one here, this is assessment method number 1, interview. Oh, by the way, I should say all C3PAO assessors, all CCAs and CCPs, they're all taught to evaluate your compliance with these 3 objectives. They have to perform uh, one or more of these things for each requirement. I know for a fact I'm a lead CCA, and I've not seen anybody else do this differently, but could be. Anyway, for interview, we like to interview for all 110 requirements. So for an interview, be prepared for any internal or external assessments, and where they want to, you should be speaking to someone at your company or speaking to multiple people at your company or teams of people, and talking to them and asking them the questions that an assessor would ask you. Hey, do you have this defined? What's the retention period? Can you show me proof that we are capturing audit logs and we are retaining them for that long? So that's one test method, is interview. So everybody at your company that you identify as being involved with this requirement, um, tag them down here. So all those people you end up talking to about the requirement, you're going to find them down here. So anybody responsible with actually doing the work and actually implementing any of these requirements, you'll tag those folks. Teams or roles, just hit add by team or role. Accountable, this typically is just one person, one role. So this is management typically, and it's the person ultimately responsible for making sure that these folks over here are in fact implementing the requirements and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Um, Consulted, anybody internal to the company or external to the company, do they need to be consulted? Okay. For that example, when I said we have an external service provider and there's some cloud auditing and monitoring going on up there in the cloud by that service provider. So consulted, you might want to tag your MSSP or that service provider's team, right? You might have to consult with that external service provider. Let's say you did define that retention requirement in your audit and accountability policy. And let's say your company changes that retention time frame from 30 days to um, 90 days. Okay. Well, you're going to need to communicate that retention setting difference or change to your cloud service provider. So that way, in that environment, they can configure those retention settings to align if that's possible. It is okay to have uh, two different definitions for technical implementation. Sorry if I'm going on a tangent here, but for example, the password complexity one, when I was doing DoD work, we defined 3 different password requirements. There was the general user password complexity and length requirements. Then there was the privileged user password and complexity length requirements. And then we also had kind of like an exception, a defined exception where our IBM mainframes, they only at max can do 8-character length passwords. So we made sure to define, hey, we're aware of this and we do authorize IBM mainframes to have 8-character passwords, and there's other mitigations in place and blah, blah, blah. So um, when you are defining something, it is okay to have multiple definitions because technology is different and that implementation on that technology may be different. Okay. So all those folks that you talk to at your company, identify them here for consulted, um, and then informed. Does anybody at your company, and maybe informed, this could have been, a better example of where you put the MSSP cloud service support team, but does anybody internal and external to the company need to be informed when there are any changes or issues pertaining to this requirement here? So fill out as you're trying to do your own internal assessment evaluation, as you're identifying the correct people to speak to and do the work, start filling out this interview section. Then this next area, examine. This is another assessment method, okay? All external assessors are going to examine some documents or reports, or they're going to examine your configuration settings. They're going to ask you to do a screen share and display some, settings, or just talk about how you're using a tool. So they're examining and they're, looking at stuff for the purpose of, determining if you are actually compliant and you are doing what you said you were doing in your system security plan and your policies and procedures. So then under examine, then everything that you end up looking at when you're doing your internal assessment and evaluation, anything that you end up looking at that gives you that warm feeling of, okay, we're compliant. So all that proof, all that the reports, the screenshots, start uploading them and logging them here under the examine area. And then the last section here that relates to a assessment method is test. Okay, this is a harder one to perform. You cannot test all 110 requirements. There are certain requirements you just can't perform tests for, and then there are some that are a bit easier. More of your technical controls are a bit easier to perform a test for. And so what a test is when they're actually executing the requirement and determining if that output was the correct and intended output. So if you say your systems are going to lock after 3 login attempts, and I sit here and I log in 3, 4 times, am I going to get locked out? That's a test. And so under test and FutureFeed, because typically testing an objective involves technology. Here's where we're associating all your technology to the requirement, all your tools, services, assets. So under here, you should be connecting. I like to say 2 things. You should be connecting all of the tools that are helping you implement and enforce that requirement. And also, you should be connecting any technology that needs to meet that requirement. So 331, okay? 2 types of assets here. For example, 331. One, I'm gonna connect my my SIEM, okay? whatever my seam is, I would log and associate my seam. I'm not sure if there's even one in here. But no, there's not. So you would connect your seam because it's helping you do audit and accountability, but then you're also going to connect your Linux database or your Windows 2019 server, because those systems have to meet and be configured to capture audit logs and retain them for so long. And so identify the technology that helps you implement that requirement, as well as the technology that's picking it up, so that way if any tests need to be performed or your assessors need any more information on those technologies, they're all found down here with, you know, just by clicking on them. Okay. Um, so I think any questions there? Let me stop there. I know I'm kind of rambling, but does anybody have any questions so far? And by the way, I'm just one assessor. Everybody assesses differently. You're going to have, a full range of assessors, and what I say is just one approach, and I don't know everything. So feel free to correct me if I say anything wrong. I'm just kind of sharing my approach to compliance management and assessing. All right. All of that for a Met objective, right? So let's talk about when an objective fails. Let's say we're looking at objective E, and we are reviewing our audit and accountability policy that we found down here, and it did not have that definition I was looking for. It's missing. So I'm going to mark it failed, right? And what I want you to know right now is for objective B, currently I do not have any POA&M items open. There's just a plus sign. So as soon as I mark this one as not met or failed, then FutureFeed automatically is going to make that first POA&M entry for me. And this is going to prevent you from putting yourself in a position where you are tracking and identifying a requirement as failed, but yet you do not have it on your system POA&M, which that situation in and itself would lead to a failure for one of the controls. And so we're helping you prevent that issue. Okay, so after you mark something not met, then the next step, or what I would recommend, is going in and tailoring that POA&M item. So open it up, and this is the POA&M item that was made. And here it is going to come pre-filled with some POA&M description. This is just meant to be, standard industry, common implementation guidance. And you should tailor it, update it, delete it out, use it, whatever you want to do. But this POA&M description here should accurately depict what your failure was. Okay, why did 331 fail? Or a 331E fail? And then what's that fix? What's the plan forward? What's your remediation plan or your implementation plan? So you can modify this, add to it, or let's just update AU policy to include retention. Okay, so update the policy to include a retention time frame. Impact, effort, and cost. How much work is this going to cost? Anything? What's this impact if I don't do this? What's the impact on my compliance, my score? Then set a due date. Due dates, you can go by quarters or specific date. And then definitely strongly recommend getting someone assigned as responsible for that POA&M item, if you know at that point in time who's going to be doing the work. If not, do tag someone as accountable, so then that person could assign that work to someone. All right. So after you mark something not met, then your next step would be to open up that poem item that was created and tailor this poem description to be more helpful. And then just note you can make more than one poem. So right now we have one. If I wanted to make another one for this objective, then I just can click on it, hit add poem, second poem, and now I have 2 poem items for that one objective. Okay, so you can manage poems however you want to, and you can create as many as you want to. We kept it flexible so that way users can use it however, best works for them. And inheritance. The last thing at the objective level is inheritance. Okay, so what this little teardrop means is shared responsibility or uh, external service providers. Your company is paying an external service provider to perform a service that meets NIST 800-171 requirements for you. So ultimately, your company is the company accountable for implementing NIST 800-171 and prepping for CMMC. But you can hire out and hire external support. If you're a small company and you don't have a system administrator, you're probably not going to be running your own vulnerability scans or monitoring or configuring or managing your own syslog server or SIEM tool. So you're going to hire an external service provider to do that vulnerability scanning for you or provide the audit log capabilities for you. So when you hire someone to help you meet these requirements, or you hire someone and you're sharing CUI or FCI data with them and they themselves need to meet the requirements. But when there's someone else involved and there's a shared responsibility for implementing and enforcing that requirement, that's inheritance. And so let's, for example, this objective here, objective F, audit records are retained. Let's pretend I'm all cloud environment. I have no physical presence. Everything I have is in the cloud. And retaining audit records and configuring my information systems to retain those audit records and generate them is all done by an external service provider. So I would mark that as fully inherited in this example. But now let's say you're a hybrid environment. You have cloud presence and on-prem presence. Okay, and your external service provider manages your cloud environment and your Windows assets and everything that's connected to that OU and that domain. But then on-prem, let's say on-prem you have a firewall. And that firewall is not connected to the domain, and that firewall isn't managed by an external service provider. I do that myself. I have a system admin and I have an employee that does that. It's their responsibility. So in that case, when you have responsibility and someone else has responsibility, that's shared. Okay, so then you would mark it partially. That tells an assessor that for objective F, there are 2 key players involved with enforcing and implementing this one objective in this environment, yourself and an external service provider. So once you, and then if you do have inheritance, also, make sure you mention it in this statement. So here would have been, how I mentioned there was some shared responsibility in a CRM. For that objective E, I would mark that one partially inherited. Now this status of inheritance aligns with this statement where I said I'm doing something and someone else is doing something. All right, so that's inheritance. let's talk about summary notes quick, because this is a question I get a lot. Is what's the difference between summary notes and a objective statement? Because in both, you're defining how the company is meeting a requirement. Well, if you're, I guess one thing I want to say is if you're going to pick one of the two to populate, then I strongly recommend at the very least, filling out the objective statements. And that's because it's just going to help you with identifying any compliance gaps and also prepare you for a better assessment. So, of the two, I recommend at the very least filling these objective statements out. However, this summary notes area is also a very useful and strong field to capture some important data. So the way I like to describe this, and again, this is all just recommendation on how I fill out FutureFeed and how I use FutureFeed. I've been doing compliance management for some time, so they say I'm good at it. But how do I want to start this? Actually, to do this talk, I'm gonna go to. Oh, my mouse just died. Hold on. Oh, there it's back. Okay. So I'm gonna go to the AC family. Because I put this in here recently. So, for example, all right, there's 110 requirements in NIST 800-171. Requirements. There's 110 requirements, and I'm harping on the word requirements because it's just important to know the difference. It took me a while to pick up on this. I'm going to be honest with you because I came from 853 DoD world, and over there we call them controls because under 853 we call them controls. So when I refer to a control, I'm actually referring to a 853 statement. All right, but under 171, 800-171 or CMMC, these are called requirements. There's 110 requirements. And in your SSP, you want to define how those requirements are being implemented. Well, how you implement, or the thing that you end up implementing, I should say that, the process, or the multiple processes and controls that you end up implementing, that is referred to as the control. Okay, so you have 110 requirements. It does not always mean that you have 110 controls. You're going to have typically less controls because one control can meet multiple requirements. Okay, so here's an example of how I write up summary notes. In the summary notes, I like to describe at a high level the entire control that was implemented to meet this requirement or multiple others. Okay, so here's an example of a implementation narrative at the control level. The company has fully implemented AC 311. Logical access to all systems is limited to only authorized users, processes, and devices. At a high level, the company has implemented at the network access layer, system layer, application layer, and the network layer, system layer, and application layer. At these three layers, at a high level, the company has implemented some tools and controls to help implement this requirement, right? So we do to limit access to your information systems, you're going to use identification and authentication. You're going to enforce identification and authentication, username and password, or MFA. You're going to implement MFA. And then we also have monitoring and alerting going on. So, access to our systems is always being monitored in the background. And if there's any suspicious activity, someone's going to get alerted. Okay. So that all together is kind of like the technical implementation of this requirement. We've configured all of our systems and the network and the application to limit access. There's roles, there's passwords, MFA, and then we're monitoring. And then we have administrative processes. The company has developed some administrative processes. So, the company has defined and implemented a access request and approval process. There's this whole process, onboarding process. When someone is hired, we submit an access request and we do onboarding training and we screen that individual. And we also define the level of access that that person will need. Do they need to be a system administrator, or are they going to be just a general user because they're part of maybe HR team, right? So we have this whole administrative process for requesting and approving access. Then we have account provisioning and deprovisioning processes. Then we also review access for devices on a defined frequency, and we also review accounts on a defined frequency. So every quarter, we're looking at access and accounts and disabling any stale accounts, right? So you can see here, there's a bunch of different stuff going on here. A bunch of stuff is being implemented. You have technical stuff being implemented. You got some administrative or manual processes that need to be followed. Okay. So all those processes together, they are working together. f- Um, and I would refer to them as your access control, that they're all one control. They're all part of the same control. That is the control that you're putting in place, is that access control. And it meets multiple requirements. It meets the MFA. It's talking about MFA. We're talking about how people are given roles based on least privilege, and um, as they go through the onboarding process, they're doing training, they're getting their screening done, they're getting devices issued, they're signing acceptable use policies, right? There's this whole access control onboarding process that we've implemented, and it meets multiple requirements. It's helping us meet multiple requirements. So in the summary notes, I'm defining at that high level, the overall like big picture, which is great for you to know, but also it's great for your assessor to know. And then at the objective level is when I just be very like not detailed. What was that one? Oh, I forgot I changed. So, um, like the one we were on, the objective was to define, and how I wrote it up was just it's defined in the AUP here. Okay. So at the objective level, I just speak to that one objective. Um, Okay, any questions on like summary notes versus objective statements, or really any of these fields here that I've covered and am displaying? All right. Um, Now the goal would be to have this assess area 100% green. That would be like probably the goal before you engage with the C3PO, right? Or maybe you'll have a couple of them that have failed, but it's okay because you know, it's not one of those controls that's gonna lead to an automatic failure. But the goal would be have everything green, right? But then also the goal would be to, within the requirements, have all of these six at least these ones here that I'm displaying: requirement, interview, examine, test, and the additional artifacts. Having these all filled out. You don't have to use the potential assessment considerations if you don't want to. These are just um, questions. They're meant to be helpful and help guide you if you are doing that internal assessment yourself and you've never done an assessment or you don't know what to ask. These are questions that you could ask someone at your company. These are questions that an assessor, an external CCA, CCP would ask, okay? But you don't have to use them. But at the the goal would be for these top 5 to have them all filled out. Have everybody identified who could potentially be interviewed. Have all your evidence, that proof linked here, and then have all that technology. So then when you go into an assessment, we recommend during that week of your assessment, it's usually a week, as you're sitting in the meeting with the assessor, have your laptop off to the side and just have FutureFeed pulled up. Because then when the assessor's sitting there and asking you, okay, let's talk about 3118, I can quickly click on 3118. And then I'm going to read this. I'm going to kind of get, maybe I need to refresh my memory a little bit um, on what was implemented and who's responsible. These are, you're not going to remember, everything that got implemented. Maybe you will, but I always needed a refresher, like, oh yeah, what did we do and who's doing that work and what's that document called? So as you're going through that assessment, you'll have FutureFeed up and be able to follow along. And if the assessor's like, oh, well, we didn't see that screenshot, can you pull up that screenshot for me? Then you can go in and pull up your evidence that you have in here. Now, they may want to see like a new live screenshot. They might want to see the actual setting that's in production, but they also, oh yeah, we never got that access control policy. Can you show that to me quick, or can you just highlight where you define that? So you can, be displaying your future feed and pulling up evidence and pulling up different sections of future feed to be showing uh, the assessor, as you're talking through some of these requirements. All right. I think I've covered everything on this assess page. So one last time, any questions with assess? Okay, moving on. And the next couple here are pretty short. That's why I spend a lot of time on the assess. It's doing a thorough assessment and capturing the assessment results and the assessment evidence is essential. And then putting that into to future feed is essential so you can be ready for that external assessment. The system security plan area subway stop. So at this point in time, if you've filled out people, tools, documents, and you have some assessment results, you should be able to generate a somewhat populated SSP. And this area of FutureFeed here is just a browser view of your system security plan. This is um, So you don't have to run an SSP report and export that Word document and then review your SSP in a Word document. You can review, edit, and assign review and approval responsibility and track approval of sections of your system security plan here in this interface, and it's a lot easier to navigate and view all the data. So all you're doing here in your SSP area is you're reviewing the different sections of your SSP to make sure that the information is accurate and you're not missing any information. And if everything's good, then you can mark it as reviewed down here if you want to use this little reviewed, not reviewed checkbox here. Or you can mark each individual section of your SSP as you can assign that section to someone. You can mark it approved. You can have them, yeah, I'm talking too fast. You can mark it reviewed and log it approved, okay? And this, notice here I'm in the data inventory section. I just approved it. Well, if I go over to this organizational information section, it's not been approved. So this little compliance review box is different for each section of your SSP that you're in. So you may want to assign the, organization information to HR, but then you might want to assign the system hardware and software pages to your IT department, who's going to be filling those out and providing those listings. Okay. And then mark, you can track them as assigned, reviewed, approved. You can see that history if there was some, and reset this review box every time you want to do an official review cycle of your SSP. Then I would recommend just resetting all of the review flags, and then you can go ahead and log that activity again and see it all in the history. Um, Now, most of what you see in this SSP area, 95% of it, is all being pulled from another section of FutureFeed. Okay, for example, in this system information area we're in, this system unique identifier, I didn't put this information here. I put it somewhere else, and it's just being displayed here. So if this is inaccurate, then I'm going to hit this edit icon, and it took me out of the SSP area. I'm over here under start now, and I this is where I'm going to update my, let's call it CIS 1345. Okay, this is where I'll update my system unique identifier. This is where I'm capturing that information. And then if I go back to my SSP, now that's been updated. Okay, so most of this information that you're seeing here that's being displayed in all of these pages, it's being captured from another area of FutureFeed. In the requirements area, what you basically see is a, watered down version of the assess area. So if you want to change some results in your system security plan, then you actually go into the assess area and you change those results, because that's what's feeding into your SSP. Now, most of this information is being pulled from other areas in FutureFeed, but there are a couple data fields that you do have to fill out, and you'll see those by the red indicators. Okay, so as you're reviewing your SSP in the browser, if you see any red, there's an issue. So here under my topology, I haven't identified my asset counting yet down here. Under hardware, I haven't uploaded a hardware listing yet, so I would click on this and go and upload that asset listing here. Okay, so if you have red, something's missing. But yeah, that's what you're doing here in the SSP. Subway stop of FutureFeed. Reviewing your SSP, editing it quickly, and then marking the sections as approved. And now when you go over to deliverables and you run an SSP report right here, when I download this SSP, which is going to be 50, 60, 70 different, hundreds of pages of information, I don't have to review it top to bottom, because I know that data in there was accurate, because it's the same data that I'm displaying and showing, and you're reviewing and approving in this SSP browser area. Okay. Any questions with your SSP? All right, then that brings us to this last area, which is your system POA&M. So all throughout FutureFeed, as you were marking tools, maybe you were identifying some issues or vulnerabilities with tools and you added them to your system POA&M. Or in documents, maybe you marked a document as pending because you're still working on the draft and it's not been approved. And for all of those objectives that you marked as failed, those are all those things, all those failures or system flaws or compliance gaps are going to be found on your system POA&M. So click into your FutureFeed and they're displayed here. These are all my pending POA&M items, here's my in progress POAM items, and then when you mark something complete in FutureFeed, we're not going to delete it. We're just going to change the status to complete, but this is where you would show assessors that you're actively managing and remediating POAM items is in your completed inventory. But right now in this environment, I have 72 POAM items, and that's if you're responsible for managing POAMs at your company, if you're the POAM manager, um, that could be a pretty tough job, especially when I'm talking about 70, 80, 90, hundreds of POAM items, right? Hundreds of issues that I have to make sure are getting worked on, and there's no project blockers, and we're going to meet the due date, right? Nothing's being forgotten about. Everything's getting worked on. Eventually, we'll be 100% compliant. Probably not. You'll still have some system flaws, but um, so where was I going with that? Oh, I'm saying that's I used to have to do project or POAM management for the DoD in EMAS, and we're talking hundreds of thousands, depending how big the organization was. Um, and so in some cases, like that's all I did for a full day, and that's because we had to update every POAM at least once a month, unless it was a very high or severe item, then we're, on that right away. But it was a policy where if you're doing POAM management, the policy was you have to provide status updates at least monthly until remediation, right? So that's a lot of items to follow up on and make sure the work's getting done. But then once the work is done, you also want to validate and verify that the work was done and the correct work was done. And then you'll also want to collect evidence. So once you mark something complete and for example, this POAM item here, 3105, physical access devices are not identified. If I mark that 3105 item as complete, meaning we corrected the issue and now we're compliant, I'm going to want to go into 3510 and make sure that I upload that evidence that I completed that activity, that I did identify those physical access devices, and we've fully met the control and the requirement. And that's because now you're going to use that evidence, that same evidence that you use to close out that POAM item is going to be the same evidence that you could potentially show to an assessor in the future to prove you are compliant. So um, that, going back to your system POAM over here, right? So I'm saying that's a lot of different items to work on. So what we've done is we've implemented this project builder. So what I like to do in my real FutureFeed environment, because we use FutureFeed to track our own internal 853 work, is I go into our system POAM and I'll filter over by proposed projects. And now all of these items that have just a plus here and it's empty, these are one-off POAM items. I don't have them as part of a project. They're single, I guess, think of it as like they're single projects right now. Well, instead of having to manage 70 different separate items, I want to try to get everything into a project. So I only have a handful of items. So now I'm going to add these to a project. That makes sense, right? So looking at this, here's a list. That's a document. So we need a remote access list document, it looks like. 3105 is also potentially another document where we're identifying devices, listing out devices. Okay, here's a policy. We have to make a policy. So I'm selecting all these document items, and now I'm going to add them to a project. Well, I can create a separate project for them, but I also have this existing project going on. It's called security documentation. So I already have somebody at my company who's working on system security documentation. Maybe I have a tech writer I'm employing a contractor to do all my CMMC documents. I don't know. So I'm going to put it in part of there and just add a project. So my goal is always to make sure everything is part of a project. But sometimes you do have like random one or two issues that don't really fit into a project. But having to manage, you know, what is this, 8 different projects and a couple one-off poem items is a lot easier in my mind than following up and figuring out where 72 different poem items are at in their remediation plan. Okay. So that's the power of the project builder is you can group like non-compliance, like issues, or group poems based on the people involved or the teams or the companies involved. And then instead of handling just a bunch of different items, you have a nice project and project portfolio. And then within a project, you can capture a lot more metadata, which would help with that project and the remediation. Okay. So that's your future feed system poem. And then under deliverables, here's where you're running your SSP report, of course. If you ever need to provide your SSP to a C3PAO or an external entity, you can export your SSP here. You can also export your poem, all your poem projects. You can export all your data and files here as well. And then another thing that we've provided you the capability to do is generate more quickly some reports or presentation on compliance metrics. Okay, so this is all gonna you're gonna be able to develop reports or presentations based on your work you've done in FutureFeed and based on the status of your compliance management things in FutureFeed. So let's pretend you want to meet with your CEO. Well, actually, let's pretend that I want to meet with my tech writer and I need to show them the security documentation project because I just updated it. I just added new items to that project, new tasks to that project, essentially. So let's quickly develop a presentation and then I'm going to end the call. Well, I'll open up the floor for Q&A. So here I'm just it's really easy. You just select what you want to see. Okay, so let's say I want to do poem. Yeah, let's do poem anatomy and action plans. And then I want to go find that one project for security documentation. There it is. So I'm going to select that one and then we're going to hit play. So now it's going to pull a bunch of information and metrics and data from FutureFeed and present this nice presentation or report. Here's my poem metrics. Here's all my poem items. It lists down there. Here's more of my poem metrics. And then it should be that one. Yeah, security documentation, that project we're working on. Okay. All right. With that, I'm sorry, I went over 5 minutes. I'm going to stop talking and open up the floor for any questions, ending remarks, anything. Okay. Well, if no one has any questions, then that's the end of this training session. And you have now completed end user future feed training for, sessions number 1 and number 2. And if you need any support in the future, you can always sign up for another one of these sessions or attend our Thursday open office hours and ask your questions there. Or at all times, you can also email support@futurefeed.co with any questions, and we'll get you some help that way. Okay. All right. Thanks all. Have a great afternoon.